These programs have been a lot of fun, the Midway Living History programs. This is our fourth one. The first one that we had was a community conversation about growing up and living in Midway. It was well attended, and I think could have gone on for hours and hours had we not been closing. So that was probably my favorite, just hearing all the stories about growing up in Midway. The second one we talked about Weisenberger Mill, and that was interesting. There's a lot of history there. We met over at the college this summer and talked about the history of Midway University. A lot of history to talk about there too. This one I thought would be a good subject because our churches do so much for our community. They mean a lot to our community. There's a lot of history behind the buildings themselves, the people there that have generations have gone to these churches. And I thought we'd have another community conversation. So there's not a speaker that's designated to talk about the history. You're not going to hear a lot of facts. I had a little panic attack earlier today thinking, what if no one wants to talk? It's going to be a short program. But I think we have a few people here that have some things to say. And I want to thank Brenda Jackson and Dee Dee Roach and Amy Perry. I'm sure I've forgotten someone. Several people donated, brought over some of their memorabilia and things, so we have lots to look at back or up here and back there. So after the program, please look at all of these things. I'm hoping that they'll share some information. Oh, and John Batts too brought a lot too. So take advantage of that and look around. I thought we would start with just talking a little bit about what churches are here in Midway. I know when I moved to Midway 10 years ago, my husband and I kind of joked about how there's a church here on every corner. For such a small town, it is chock full of churches. And then as we've lived here longer and longer, I've come to really appreciate the churches and what they all do for our community. They step up in times of need. They bring us together for meals. We sometimes have different congregations that come together to worship. And it's really a special place. Every church in this town is very special. So I have a list, and I probably have missed a church because there are so many. I'd like you to raise your hand if you have attended or been a member of that church in the past or are currently a member, and see what kind of representation we have here tonight. Midway Christian Church. Midway Baptist. Right. Midway Presbyterian. We have the minister from Midway Presbyterian here. Thank you for coming, Mary. Sojourn City Church. Grace Fellowship of Midway, Pilgrim Baptist, Historic Second Christian, St. Matthew's A&E. Yes, thank you for coming. Zion Hill Missionary Baptist, and Forks of Elkhorn is a Midway church. I often forget about them because they're out of the way a little bit. Are there any churches I've missed?
Midway Methodist.
Midway Methodist. I don't know why. I went online, so I know about that church, but I went online and tried to copy it, so it wasn't online. I'll blame the internet. Yes, Midway Methodist. So you all are from Midway Methodist. Thank you for coming. All right. So I would just like to open up the floor. I do have some questions in case we can't get the conversation going that might direct us a little bit. And Mayor Grayson is supposed to join us. He's very good at getting these conversations going, much better than I. There were other conflicts tonight, a lot going on, but hopefully he will join us a little late. So would anyone like to start out? Maybe even, this doesn't have to be a program on facts, the things that we find in history books. This can also be a program about stories we have, good and bad, things that we love about our churches, things that have impacted us in this town. So that's what substance really is. It's not necessarily dates and facts. So feel free to tell any stories you have. No? No stories?
I'll start.
Oh, I
so that
see.
people can talk. I noticed, and this, you could stand at the traffic light, the one, Midway traffic light, and I know you can see 5 churches. I'm not sure if you can see the one that's on the corner by the railroad track. Pardon? Okay. And can anybody see more than that 5? You agree 5 at the traffic light?
Sounds about right. Yeah. Stand on one corner and
That's
see
about
5
5
churches.
Pardon?
You stand on one corner and see 5 churches.
The traffic light.
At the traffic.
I don't think you see them from the corner, you know,
Okay.
it's traffic.
Gotcha. Hi, come on in. You might have to sit up front. That's my place. We'll start with, what is Midway's oldest church? Does anyone know what Midway's oldest church would be? I don't personally, so please.
Is it the Presbyterian down by the college? I think that's one of the oldest on this side of the Mississippi. Or,
Historic second.
Less second Christian.
Or it's,
That would be my guess, but that's also by the college, a historic second Christian church.
yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
John, as far as I know, we know.
Yeah, what year was that?
we have a year of 1832, and it's always been like I guess, a question about our date of the church, and I've done more research on that 1832 date, and at one point, it was like we had an 1852 date, but I know our church was there earlier than that because I found some information that I've researched, and for example, a church was built there on the Midway University campus. It was a log church, and that was back in 1842. But the people were allowed to meet on that campus around the 1830s, believe it or not. I found information that, researched that.
So Midway University is older than that? Than,
The land, no, it's the land, we're talking just about the land that
Oh.
was there, not the buildings and the
Okay.
university or anything like that, but the land. The land that was there. The slaves were allowed to meet on that land when it was the Kentucky Female Orphan School.
Which was founded in 1847.
1847. But the land was there and they allowed the slaves to meet there as a congregation real early. And so then later on, they built a log church. It was actually a log church that was built on that land. And then like, I had a newspaper article say it was way back in 1842. Even though the people met as a congregation, but the building wasn't there until like in the 1840s. The lady that did the research on the history of Second Christian, her name was Katherine Johnson, and she had been collecting history for over 110 years, she said. And she had started back in 1912. So she knew a lot about the history of the church that probably nobody else did. And then people began to write about the history of our church, but she had been collecting history for years. And she knew about the meeting of the slaves on that campus before the school was even there. And that was back in the, she said like 1832, but according to her history, and I've got a copy of that, she was saying even earlier, 1827. And the church started out when, I guess, had the masters and the slaves were meeting together. And it started out in the Grassy Springs Church. And I've got some information on Grassy Springs. And then they all came to Midway, but they started out from other surrounding churches here in Woodford County.
Now, did something happen to the building of the Second Christian Church? That was rebuilt?
Right, the log church. Inside the log church was a school. And I didn't know that, but Katherine Johnson had written about, she had one sentence in our history, and she talked about a school that was in the church. And you'll see a copy of the first school report. It's a 150-year-old report. That report's 150 years old, and it talks about the school that was inside the church. It was a freedmen's school from the federal government. So the federal government set up schools around the nation, after the Civil War. And Midway had a school inside that church from the federal government. And it was there till like maybe the last report was maybe like 1869, something like that. But that's an 1868 report. No, it's the first report, it's the 1867 report. It's the first report from the federal government stating that there was a school inside the Second Christian Church when it was an old log church. So be sure to look at that report. It's pretty old. It has what the children were learning how to do, arithmetic, read, and so forth, but I thought that was a real interesting report that came from the Freeman's Bureau. Freeman's Bureau, so it's over 150 years old.
Hey guys, come on up and sit down. Have a seat, Heather. Come on in and sit down. Is there a connection between the Christian churches in Midway? Midway Christian and Second Christian, and would anyone care to elaborate a little bit on that? So we're just trying to be put on the spot.
The Midway Christian Church looks at its founding in 1844, and they had slaves that went to that church, and evidently those slaves also ended up going to Second Christian. And one of the first ministers at Second Christian was a man named Alexander Campbell, that was not the Alexander Campbell, but was a slave from one of the farms in the area. And there's anecdotal evidence that I've been trying to find for a while that we know he got some type of education. There's anecdotal evidence that he went to Transy to actually get some education because there was the seminary and things there. But there's no records of any of the African Americans during that time. But like I said, there's fairly good evidence that he actually did go there. And there's the Patterson cabin that's on the back side of the Transy Library is the potential cabin that they used for that, for the education of the African Americans. Like I said, there's the dates for the Second Christian, because they predate the founding of Midway Christian. Like there's several of the stories that in our founding that ties back into since we're both disciples. But L.L. Pinkerton, worked with Kentucky Mormon School, and not just Midway Christian, but all of the churches in town. And John T. Johnson, who was a U.S. Senator from Georgetown, ended up coming here to Midway and started recruiting people from all of the different churches. Midway just took most of the credit. Midway Christian just took most of the credit. But it was a collaboration with all the people that were in Midway. And there were several times where the people in the students at Kentucky Mormon School were sent home into the community, and they didn't go just to Midway Christian, they went to the church families all over Midway, so.
For those of you who have joined us a little later, we're just opening up the floor to talk about the churches. They don't have to be historical stories. They don't have to be, historically that you find in a textbook, but just stories and things that we have about our churches here in Midway and what we do for the community and how we're connected and what makes the churches special. So it's kind of in the history of them too. I would like to hear a little bit more, and I'm going to put people on the spot, about St. Matthew AME, because I don't know much about that church, how long it's been there, how big the congregation is. Would anyone like to share a little bit about St. Matthew?
I was surprised to read on Facebook that they celebrated their 158th anniversary. And I just checked tonight again, it was on March 25th of this year. And I thought, that's amazing.
It's a long time.
So you need to tell us about it.
Brenda probably can tell you more than I can.
It's y'all's church.
Well, I do have a page.
Send a picture up there of that church.
Uh-oh, this one in.
didn't it?
to 1860. Yeah.
A program from this year's church anniversary.
See how many?
And it has a little bit of the history in it, just a little bit, if you want to look at it. Brenda, you on the spot again?
She can read. Can you read that? What do you got?
Okay, I'm gonna read it.
Okay, that's good.
From Brenda's information. St. Matthew AME Church is at 110 South Winter Street. The congregation purchased this lot for the location of their church as early as 1854, with Reverend Moses Burke as its first pastor. They originally met in a frame building on this site. Then in 1886 built a brick church and moved the frame structure behind it. Both were destroyed by fire in 1892. The present brick building, constructed by David Lehman, was erected that same year. During the Civil War, when colored troops were authorized by the federal government, the church served as an office of underground recruitment for Union troops at Camp Nelson. On May 10, 1877, Reverend Burks and other citizens formed the Sons and Daughter of Relief, a charitable organization that purchased a cemetery ground behind Midway Presbyterian Church. In 1917, when the north side of Main Street included many African American businesses, the Sons and Daughters of Relief purchased the old Central Saloon at 124 East Main Street, now the Midway Museum store. They operated a restaurant on the first floor and held meetings upstairs.
The first church, I'm gonna add, the first church was destroyed by fire, and until the members could rebuild, the congregation worshiped in a hall. Now, I'm looking for the date. The church now was built in 1892. Am I correct?
Right.
Okay. I'm trying to find when the first church burned. And I know I got it somewhere. Brenda, you looking?
I know it's 1892, that's
Was
the
it
year.
when it burned? Okay. And that was the second church that was built. The first church was just like this one. The older church was moved to the back. The second church was built. It burned out that whole block. David Lehman, if I'm not mistaken, built that church. I'm through.
How long have you been a member?
All my life.
How about you guys?
Like,
I think that's pretty special. You too, Brenda, of your church?
Right. I found my baptismal certificate. It was 1958. So, 60 years of November.
Well, now, what was the population of like whites and African Americans? Were they equal? Were there just about equal numbers of both races at that time, or?
Well, according to one census, believe it or not, and it's the 1860 census, there were more slaves and free people here in Woodford County than the whole state of Kentucky.
Oh my
Yeah,
God!
in 1860. And that's why we had a lot of African Americans here in Woodford County, because, probably because of the industry, horses or whatever, the farms. And if you look at the 1860 census, and I think I've got a copy somewhere, you'll see like the percentage of the whites were like 48%, and the African Americans like 52%. So it was more slaves here than white people. 1860.
I thought this was very interesting. September 5th, 1941. All of the churches in Midway on a Thursday night came together and delivered a message with the ministers from other churches on a program. What we're doing today. They did it in 1941. And I think it goes back farther than, it was something about where they marched from Pilgrim to St. Matthew's, the community, and it was either 1,000 or 2,000 people involved.
I don't know that you see that in many communities where churches have intercongregational services together. I think that's fairly unique to me.
I can answer that question, because there's an incorporation date, and I've been an astrologer 45 years, and the founding date, according to the town, and according to Wikipedia, so anybody can correct me if they wish. The founding date was January 31st, 1835, and then the incorporation date was February 7th, 1846. The planet Neptune rules spirituality. So this is a town that will take anybody's belief system and integrate it and make it work, which is pretty extraordinary. I can pass this around. It won't mean anything to you, but you can pass it around. If you want explanation, just ask, but it's Neptune that rules spirituality and religion. And because it's in Aquarius, anybody in the room that's an Aquarian would know how much humanitarian things matter, causes, what can we do to help, extend the helping hand. It all comes together.
I found the article. The church was burned February 18th, 1892.
Did they know, was it candles? Did they know what caused?
They don't know.
Where is Pilgrim Baptist?
Corner of Stevens and Grass.
If you want
I'm sure you've seen it many times.
It's a beautiful church. As you're going towards the university, it's right there on the cross.
From the university, and that's why
This is a picture of it.
When you come
There's a
in.
picture of it right here.
No. Good picture.
It is. These are all great
I was
pictures.
the one, that was what they, yeah, we thought that was a Presbyterian church.
There's a lot to answer.
Hey, all right.
I have a question. I wondered why there's no, well, there might not be a reason, but there's no Catholic churches here. Have there ever?
I'm with my parents.
I'm a lifelong member of St. Francis de Sales up here at White Sulphur. And most of Midway's Catholics, let the ones that were, gravitated over there. And as the crow flies, that's just 3 or 4 miles.
Oh, is it still Midway?
It's not a Midway address, it's in Scott County.
Right.
Interesting.
And there are a lot of Scott County places that are Midway addresses.
Right.
Did you say St. Francis?
St. Francis
So
de
that's
Sales.
where the convocation was.
Yeah.
Is
So,
that the one on 460?
yes ma'am. That little community's called White Sulphur.
Okay.
And somebody here mentioned the Johnson family. The Johnsons owned most of that area over there. I mean, they owned thousands and thousands of acres. And they were never Catholics, but White Sulphur was a resort community. And it had a sulfur spring,
Right.
and it was called White Sulphur Springs, not to be confused with the one in West Virginia. And so people came from all over, and there was a hotel there, and it was a big draw in its day. People came from the deep south and would spend the summer up here because it was considered to be much more climate than the deep south. Now, can you imagine summer in Kentucky? But that feels good. Mississippi, Alabama.
Right.
But the church over there that stands now was built in 1820. And it replaced an earlier log church that dated to the 1790s, I think. But up until that time, the Catholics were served by circuit riders. So, you know, and they'd have mass in someone's house along the way. But there were very few Catholics in this area, you know. But over at White Sulphur, there was a pretty good population of them. So that's where most of Midway's Catholics went at that time, you know. If there were any over here, they were members over there.
Thank you.
I got a question though for the Christians. And my grandparents used to respectfully refer to them as Campbellites. Does anybody ever hear that? And for years I've heard Campbellites. I had no idea what a Campbellite was. But is it true that over here was in the Christian church was born the split between the disciples of Christ and Church of Christ?
Yeah.
Somebody told me that.
Started there.
I understood it to start here.
Yes, it is one of our illustrious history that we are so proud of, that fighting and arguing is a part of our DNA. We are Campbellites, as disciples of Christ. We are born of the wilderness frontier. We went to the Cane Ridge Revival with Barton Stone.
Yeah.
We were Presbyterian for a little bit. Liked what they said a little bit, and then said, oh, we're going to change a few things. Then we met up with a guy named Alexander Campbell from Bethany, West Virginia, and we liked them, and then basically merged to become the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Giving you the very, very brief version. But how this relates with Midway Christian Church is that one of our original building with L.L. Pinkerton brought in a melodeon one day for worship. And what the story has been told to me is he brought it in and said the congregation's singing was so bad, it was scaring the rats away.
Yeah, that's actually his biography.
Yeah, and so that did not go over well with some of the elders in the church. And so in the middle of the night, one of the elders, and we like to use the term servant, but it was a slave at that time, snuck in and stole the melodeon and hid it in a barn. Found it in 1930 something, is that right, John?
I think it was 1932. They found the melodeon in a barn out at Fawcett Tavern, basically. And nobody knows exactly how it got there, but the parish family bought the melodeon and restored it and gave it back to Midway University.
Where
It is a tiny little piano, but it was mostly used at that time in bars to keep people. It was sort of like a karaoke machine.
If you know what a harpsichord is, it looks very much like, it looks and plays a lot like a harpsichord. It is an air pump. When you, like the pedals on a piano are usually used to mute the strings, this is used to pump the accordion, the bellows. And so it plays that way. We have that melodeon in the Midway University Little Memorial Library, if you'd like to see it. Yes, and I think I have on this video camera a recording of the last time it was played, which was sometime in May. We cracked it open for the first time since 1967, attempted to play it, and it played.
No, we split with the eventual what would become Church of Christ. My understanding is why there are two separates between the Second Christian Church and Midway Christian Church. And there are two different narratives of why that happens. If you ask Midway Christian Church, it was because L.L. Pinkerton at that time believed that the African American members were not recognized as full members. They weren't allowed to vote. And so helped build Second Christian Church. Second Christian Church has a very different narrative of a founding. The other interesting piece of our connection with Second Christian Church and with the LL Pinkerton, if you notice, we have the LL Pinkerton window in our sanctuary. And I asked that question of why we have Jesus on this side in the sanctuary, we have Jesus in like the library and Jesus in the sanctuary. And I was told this goes back to LL Pinkerton and a split. He served in the Civil War but went to the north side. Most of the congregation was on the south side. And so I say, this is me, not officially, but they created this memorial window to help rebuild ties with L.L. Pinkerton, but in a sense, it might have been a thumbing of the nose because Pinkerton's on the north side and Jesus is on the south side.
I'm gonna pass this around, and it's like on the, okay, I guess the population, and you'll see Kentucky, and you'll see, Woodford County, that's marked on this map. And then you also see that, the percentage of the, I guess the slaves to the people here in Woodford County, the percentage. I'll pass this around, you can look at that.
I'll put Mary on the spot. How long have you been with the Presbyterian?
In Midway, I've been here since 2007.
Okay, and that's the church you go to. How long have you been a member there?
Since 1951.
Okay.
Ask my mom. How long have you been at the Presbyterian Church?
Since 1946.
Any interesting history that you all want to share about that church? Any interesting stories or things that?
I know that the first one was on one of the farms that Alexander's owned. Then the second, from that, they moved to about halfway between Midway and Frankfort on the Leestown Road. Then they built a church in Midway that's, actually it's about where the Presbyterian Manse garage is, and it faced Warsaw. And it was a wood church. And then after that, another church, a bigger church, was built facing Turner Street, and it burned. And then they built the one that's there now. I don't know all the dates.
Fires. Thank you for sharing.
Stacy, how many churches are there now today in Midway?
That's a great question. I missed one, and I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there were 11 that I counted, and I may have missed a small one or one on the outskirts. It's easy to focus on the churches here in the city of Midway, but there are others around. So it's a lot for this population.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there a significant reason why all the churches locally appear to have turrets as part of their construction?
Anybody?
I'm just curious.
No, that's a great question.
They use pattern books, probably, and these pattern books have always.
Follow the pattern. If you've ever noticed, the AME church and the Baptist church look very, very similar. And I'm assuming that Mr. Lehman probably built both. Maybe used very similar plans. The Baptist church at one time had a steeple on it. And that was before my time. And it was never replaced.
It blew off?
And, but the bell still works.
Now, how long have you attended the Baptist church?
I have been a member at Midway Baptist since 1962, I believe, 61, somewhere along there. But I was a member at Providence Baptist on 460, and I moved my membership to Midway, but my great-grandmother, on both sides, I had great-grandmothers on both sides of Midway Baptist, and great-uncles and aunts, and so there's a lot of, went back a long way.
I would like to see a show of hands of those of you who are, that go to a church that's multi-generational, that your parents and maybe even grandparents went to as well.
You did.
Our family originally went to the Midway Christian Church, and then through marriage, they moved over to the Midway Presbyterian Church. And then through popularity of a minister, they moved back to the Christian Church. So we're not really sure where we belong. We are Christian, so.
You're good. Refer back to my questions. Well, we've talked about this some, but I'm interested in how the churches in Midway have brought our community together. And I could say how I think, but I would like to hear how you think that some of the churches bring us together as a community. And maybe there's instances where they have, and we've talked about in the past, took us apart as well in our history. But it could be modern day or in the past how those churches have brought us together.
Well, I know my mother-in-law is a resident in the school apartments. And the Christian church and the Baptist church are so kind to them to bring food and, you know, to minister to them, not only through the food service, but also any kind of prayer needs that they have, or any way that they can help. They're so great to do that. Now, there may be other churches that take part, but that's the two I hear about, because, you know, they bring food. So, so that makes them especially nice.
Well, the Christian church is definitely big on food. And the community dinner, I think, is
And the community garden.
yes,
Right.
that's a great example. The community garden has certainly brought us together.
And the Midway Presbyterian Church and the Midway Baptist Church do the backpack program together.
And how does, what will you tell a little bit of details about the backpack?
The backpack program is where on Fridays, we give enough food for a child to last through the weekend.
Is that specifically the north side?
Yes.
They're no longer backpacks because of sanitary reasons. They're grocery bags, but I don't know about you, our youth pack ours on Wednesday night. And they're collected, delivered to the school. The school provides the number they need, and so I think we do about 20. You all do about 20?
We do 20 every week.
Yeah. That's what we do.
It's double.
So it's like food they can put in the microwave and that a child can fix themselves.
And that's all donated by church members?
When we were coming up, and I was gonna probably be tired of hearing like this. But we played baseball, and the churches had teams down in Crawford. And that's where I first ran into the African American churches, because they had by far the best team. I think Second Christian and A&E went together to this game, and they had fast pitch. And they were the champs. So that's where, I know our church had teams, and my daddy was a pitcher, and he could fight with the referees. So I don't remember if all the churches had teams, but I know they were quite a few. And we did get this. I think that'd be a good thing to revise.
We hear that a lot in our history programs about that league. It really was a fond memory for many people. Yes, ma'am.
We have, especially with Midway Presbyterian, we do services, Pentecost Sunday. We have, now with the community, we do Martin Luther King celebration, and we do Easter, Thanksgiving, Ash Wednesday. We do a lot of things together, and that's been really, really good.
Well, Mary ought to tell about where is she? Locally grown.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Locally grown.
Yeah.
It's a community youth group with the goal to involve all the youth in Midway. It's not supposed to replace any church, it's just supposed to augment their church experience. So Lee and Sarah Busick are the leaders of it. They're fantastic. And they have very intentionally met at every church in Midway. And if you weren't a youth, I'm sorry for you, because it was awesome to be able to visit every church and meet all the ministers. And they did. They met all the ministers, and every one of them shared faith stories and what it was like for them to be in their communities. And I feel like we should do it for adults, because it was great. I mean, we got to see the basement. Chris Wright, who's the pastor at Pilgrim Baptist, showed us their basement, and they had uncovered a stone in the basement, and one of the architects or the person who had been a stonemason, and they showed that off, and it was really neat to see, which I would not have otherwise seen. But the goal is to have not just the kids in every church to know each other, but for the kids to also know as many of us in the community as possible. So it's not just, we're too small to do that. We're too small to keep kids in one little church and do it all ourselves, which I think is a blessing of smallness, is that you know you can't do it yourself. So I think there's a lot of interdependence that happens. And this summer we had a fantastic vacation Bible school, which was awesome, between the Methodist Church, Midway Presbyterian, St. Matthew AME, the Christian Church, and we visited each other's churches, and we were all in charge of different leadership parts of it. And it was, I mean, it was good for the kids, but it was great for the adults.
How many kids ended up enrolling in that?
I'm sorry?
About how many kids approximately ended up?
There were about 58 total. And, first we said, we might get 10, 12, 20 kids, that'll be awesome. It's our first year, we'll just see how it goes. And then it was like, whoa, all these kids were coming to it, and we had a lot of fun. I guess we had a great time doing it together.
As the mother of a 12-year-old son, I've definitely appreciated locally grown, and then the Vacation Bible School this summer. Because when you go to a smaller church and there's not as many children there to interact with your youth, it's nice to have a community-based group where kids can come together and have that youth group experience. I mean, I had it when I was younger. It's pretty special, and it builds a sense of community with those kids that's always there. It's not like any other place. Well, how about memorable pastors of churches? I know there have been some in the history of all these churches that stand out for one reason or another. Anybody have anything to share? Bill,
Speak of memorable pastors.
Mary Weaves. Supposedly, John Fee, who founded Berea College, he's listed as a supply minister at our Presbyterian church in 1846. But
You remember that, do you, Bill?
I looked in the session minutes, they don't mention him at all, but I assume maybe he preached there, but he was an abolitionist, and I just can't imagine him. Well, I read his autobiography, and he said the few churches he preached in, and this is in 1846 in Kentucky, he said he wasn't welcome back. He didn't mention their names, but I just can't imagine that he would have preached there more than once because of the.
I thought it was also interesting when you look through some of those membership or the sign up, and then whites would bring their black slaves with them, and they would sit next to each other.
They wouldn't have their last name.
Well, there were, black members of our church, and I'm sure that some of the other churches too, but it's in the session minutes, they show accepting, there's a handful of men and women, and it said colored.
I have a story about an organist at our church. We had an organist, her name was Miss Nat Parrish Rouse. She lived where Holly Hill Inn is now. And she was a really fun lady, but sometimes she would sleep late when she was supposed to be at church to play the organ. And she would fly in right as the bell was ringing, and she had a full-length fur coat. And she wore the fur coat during the whole church service because underneath she still had on her nightgown.
Joy?
The first pastor I had when I came to Midway was the first pastor I ever really had a pastoral relationship with, Jamie Broom. And he was somebody with whom I was compatible on so many different levels that I really miss him. Though we have been blessed since he left. We do miss Jamie.
And this is at the Baptist church? At the Baptist church?
Yes, that's Baptist church.
How old is Baptist Church? 1872. That's the only building that I know. I think that was the original building.
But no, it's not that one.
No,
No, it looks like that.
it looks very similar, yeah.
Did it branch off of an earlier Baptist church somewhere in Woodford County, or?
I have heard that it came from Great Crossings.
Well,
There was a split.
that
from Great
doesn't
Crossings.
surprise me because although I'm Catholic, that's mother's side of the family, but dad's side were Baptist. And they went to Great Crossings. And that congregation prided itself on starting a lot of other churches. But what they don't mention often is that sometimes it involved a big fight.
That was most of the time.
And that goes for the Catholics too. Over here in White Sulphur, we were known as that troublesome parish. And that was mainly because of the dancing issue. The priest didn't want him dancing, but the parishioners disagreed. So, and a lot of churches really had major falling outs over dancing. I was surprised. That went across all religions, I think.
I think in the early years, we partnered with Mount Vernon Baptist. I know we did as far as missions. I know missions have always been a big part of Midway Baptist, but I'll check the date here. It doesn't say. It just says from our earliest days, we supported foreign and home missions. And our sister church, Mount Vernon, the two of them together, provided the first support for the first Southern Baptist missionary to Japan. And if you've ever been in our church, the sanctuary, there's an overflow room, and in the back corner, there's a vase inside of a cabinet or whatever. And that came from Japan, from that missionary family that was supported. So,
Church was chartered in 1872.
right.
We had a minister at the Presbyterian Church in the 1960s. His name was Reverend Hoffman. He later went to California, but when he was minister, on Sunday nights at his house, in the manse, he would have sing-alongs. And we had these little spiral-bound books, and we did songs with hand motions, like Deep and Wide and other songs like that. And people from all over the community were welcome to come to the sing-alongs, and a lot of families went and sang, and then we got to eat cookies and drink juice, Kool-Aid.
I remember that. It was before we had youth group at our church, and it was called Singspiration.
Midway Christian Church called Broadhurst, and after starting here, he went to Louisville and somehow got connected with the Christian care communities, which would eventually become, with the nursing
He
home
worked,
here.
the original group was called Ready Force, or Ready Workforce, and he went to Frankfurt and then went to Louisville, but there's now 12 different homes, including Home Place, that's associated with Christian care communities, but he helped found that. One of our ministers helped found the church, or the school that began the Fort State University. But he said that was, it was a teaching school. He went to form a teaching school and then ended up becoming part of Morgan State. There was, and I always forget his name, William Lorimer, I think he was a young, vibrant minister in 1941 and was a conscientious objector during World War II. But a year after the war broke out, he died of a heart attack unexpectedly. And he was 26 years old.
Wow.
And we used to have 2 women's fellowship groups, and one of them was named after the Lorimer. It was named after him. And then we had Roy Robertson, who was probably one of the first ministers who drove a motorcycle in
We had a pastor that was with us over 20-some years. He baptized me and he baptized my daughter, so he's been there long. But his name was Reverend N.L. Passmore, and he was the football coach at Dunbar High School in Lexington. And he took us, he was really into youth, and so he used to take us to different church conferences and in Kentucky and in Tennessee and all. And I remember this one time, it was back during segregation. And we were on our way to Memphis or somewhere.
Coming back Georgia.
Somewhere. And we had stopped to get something to eat. And the people did not want us to come into their establishment and told us to go to the back door to get our food. So we made our order. There was quite a few of us, so we made our order. And Reverend Passmore says, now get back in the car and we're leaving. So I was so excited.
We also went to the movies. They wouldn't let us in.
Yeah. And he was just, he taught us so much. Some of his students at school, they would talk about, you know, he was a hard teacher and everything. Everybody loved him. I said, well, you all had him in school, and we had him in church. Yeah, oh yeah, and he could be preaching, and he would always make us all come up on the front row. And if we were chewing gum, he would stop preaching and come down to the front row and put his hand out on the front row. But we loved Reverend Passmore. He was such a good man. He taught us so many lessons in life, and we'll never forget him. He gave us our motto for our church, which is the little church with the big heart in the heart of Midway.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, Second Christian had a lot of ministers. And as y'all know, our first minister, his name was Alexander Campbell. He was named after the founder of course, Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And then we had another minister, his name was Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis, and he was the one that built the churches over there now. In 1906, it was Anthony Davis. And we had another minister, his name was Isaac Hathaway. No, His name was Robert Hathaway. But his son, Isaac, he was commissioned by the United States government to design an African-American coin that I have here. And he designed 2 coins, one with Booker T. Washington and George, what was the other one?
Washington Carver.
George Washington Carver, thank you. But anyway, it was his son, not the minister, but it was his son. He was at our church for a long time. His name was Robert Hathaway, but his son, Isaac, he designed these coins. And it was like in 1952 and 1940 something, they made like 5 million coins. They used to melt them all down, and they're really hard to find now. But one had 2 images on it of 2 African American people, and the other one, I think it just had George Washington Carver on it. Or was it Booker T? It was either one or the other. But anyway, this is the coin that one of our minister's sons designed.
And he lived down in Pine Street.
Okay.
In Lexington. His home was on Pine Street.
That is, yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else have anything to share? Those are all the questions I have.
We have a little display in our church, and we also have 2 paintings. That were the first, we got them from Mildred Buster. She had them sitting in her garage, and it was her how many greats?
It's her great-grandfather, I think, Jess Martin and his wife.
Yes. And they were sitting in her garage, and we asked the kids if they wanted it. They didn't want it. So they were the first couple married in our church. And so we have them now in beautiful frame.
And Leslie, what church is it?
We're Presbyterian, and you can go in and see them. The church is open. But they're just beautiful. They're up on the wall, and they just seem like they should be there. They just really look pretty. But she just gave them to us.
That's great.
Yeah, I didn't.
Does the Midway churches ever gather together, maybe during different times of the year? Have they ever had like a community open house where they're all open and you can go and visit all of them? Especially like historic architecture, you know, like in conjunction with the fall festival or Christmas time or something like that? Have they ever
So Sarah's
considered?
saying yes?
Yeah, maybe they do it already, I don't know, but I just wondered if they would consider that.
I think the history committee, the Midway History Committee did that. Had the churches as an emphasis one Saturday, and we're all open.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And, well, I don't have a dog in that fight. I know I live in Frankfurt, and down there, they have that candlelight tour every year for Christmas. And most of the downtown churches open up, and.
We actually talked about, with the history program for the library, doing a tour of, homes, but the Women's Club did an excellent tour of homes this summer, and they included Second Christian Church. So that's something to keep in mind in the future. There is a lot. Anybody else? Maybe before we wrap up, we could stay here longer and talk. Anybody wants to say anything? But I would like the people who brought things to share on both tables, maybe just to let you know what's there so you can make sure you see it before you leave. John, you brought serving a plate?
Well, it was one of the serving plates from the church in the 1870s, or 1880s.
It's
But it just,
what kind of plate?
it was one of the collection plates.
Oh, collection plate. Ooh,
Also have.
but you didn't collect very much. One penny here, one penny there.
I didn't bring it, but I also got one of the first elders chairs from the Christian church.
Brenda, do you want to tell some of the stuff that you brought that they would want to see before they head out?
Where to start?
And you brought a lot.
You brought a lot. But anyway, you'll see the pictures of all the African American churches here in Midway. On the front table, you'll see some posters up against the window. of different events in the church. On the end, you'll see a real interesting information about our first minister's wife. Her name was Rosa Campbell, and she did this card. You'll see the card, and the original card was done like in 1910, and I found it at the Lansing Theological Seminary. But anyway, Rosa Campbell provided a lot of information about her husband, Alexander Campbell. And at one point, we had 300 people at our church. Can you imagine 300 people? And Pilgrim Baptist Church had 900. On their church roll, they had 900 people. I don't remember how many St. Matthew, you all had a lot too. But back in those days, we had a lot of people that went to church, and compared to what we have now. But anyway, you'll find some information on the posters, and also each of the African American churches, they have a Kentucky Historical Society historical markers. Okay, and I've got information in the books in the back about that. So, spotlight.
I wanted to let you all know that there is the chili cook-off downtown on November the 17th, and the reason that that's important because the proceeds benefit the Ministerial Association. So you're asking for people to submit chili, and it's $5 to come taste, is that right?
Yes.
So,
And all the proceeds go to the ministerial stays right here in Midway.
yeah, so that's a good cause.
Is how many, things do we, you know, that we do together like that? The 9/11 service, like Easter sunrise service, Ash Wednesday, Good Friday, Martin Luther King, Thanksgiving.
The community service in the park this year.
Yes.
Yeah, that's usually around 9/11.
So let me ask you this. So many of the white churches have really gotten lax in their attire. You know, it's like, as long as you're there, we don't care what you wear. But it seems like, are your African American churches, like when we go through Lexington, you see people come out of church, you know they come out of church. They got their hats. I mean, is that not like that Midway? You've never worn a hat? Oh my goodness!
I don't.
I don't know, I saw a lady coming out of what I now know is Pilgrim Baptist Church.
But otherwise,
I'm watching her, and I'm just grinning like a fool, and I know she's thinking, who is this person? But she looks so pretty.
Beautiful.
She really looked beautiful, and I could tell she had been to church. It was really refreshing.
There's extra flyers, if anybody wants to.
I'll set it up in the back here. Anybody wants to watch that door, because the alarm will go off. Thank you all for coming so much. I think these programs, they're very meaningful to me. I love to hear about the history and just how everyone's connected in some way. And our churches do so much, and that's one reason, personally, I started going to Midway Christian Church because the community dinners were just so amazing to me that they welcomed everybody there to eat. I think that's such a great service. And all the churches have something they do special, really, to minister and to bring our community together. So,
When's the next community dinner?
it's Monday.
Oh, is
There
it?
you go. Yeah.
And it's dress up if you.
If you want to wear a costume.
We're having,
Oh, dress, yeah. You see, I didn't have that. It's not that kind of art.
This Saturday, the Baptist Church is doing what we call Mission Midway. If you know of anybody who needs yard work, let us know. We've got crews that'll be going out, raking leaves, cleaning gutters, that kind of thing. So if you can just call the church office, or you can call me or Joy, and let us know, we'd be glad to help out. We have plans to deliver 20 food boxes that day. But if you know somebody that needs one, just call the church office and we'll make up another one. You know that the community food bank is in our church. It is used. I don't know if you all know how often it's used, but usually about 20 families a week. When we had the storm back in July with the electricity was out, we had the doors open and helping people up till 6 and 7 o'clock at night, trying to get food boxes out to them. And so we appreciate donations that come in for that. Midway University is collecting on Halloween. If you haven't gotten something at your door, you probably will. And all that comes into the food pantry, and it'll turn around and go back out. So that's all.
Well, they showers, you know, you had the showers during the, you should have advertised it bathing with the day. I think we should.
There's also all the blessing boxes. We didn't talk about all the blessing boxes around town. So thank you all very much for sharing your stories and sharing
Sandra's got one. Harry Anderson.
Oh, yes.
Was a member of St. Matthew's.
Yes.
He helped dig our basement out. At what it is today. I don't like pictures. That's what I'm doing. Dig our basement out.
Yes.
As a little girl, I can remember running to the top of the hill where he lived, to the top of the hill with my cousin. We would grab Mr. Harry's hand and take him down the hill for a penny. Or a stale cookie. That Miss Ada had. He cleaned the bank, the Christian church. Anybody else remember anything?
He built my house.
Started our
He
furnace.
built
Yeah, he built the 2 houses. And he was a member of our church. When he got happy in church, he was blind. He did not touch a seat in that church. He walked that aisle and didn't touch nothing and would go back to that second seat in that church.
And he walked to church.
Yeah, he was walking.
We have a dog? No. Like when he said that white thing. Yeah.
They did a whole article about him and his belief.
But the distillery coming down the hill, the distillery was on the right, and the houses was on the left. And I can remember swinging, going down the hill with Mr. Harry.
How sweet.
Thank you all.
Thank you.